Hi everyone, I'm Allie with PotomacBeads. And if you want to learn circular peyote or you want to learn freeform circular peyote, stay tuned for this video. I show throughout the video, so make sure you stay to the end, how to do more of that freeform look, change up the patterns, and use different size beads. If you do need any beads to do this or using up your stash, you can look below the video in the description to get links to shop with us online. Gather up some varying size beads, some thread and needle on your bead mat, and we'll get ready to get started. All right, so to get started with circular peyote, just like peyote stitch, I want to go over the fact that you can use anything. I'm going to be using for the necklace design and changing up some patterns, 8/0 seed beads, 11/0 seed beads, and Miyuki delicas. Again, showing that anything can work for this. I did this as a Facebook Live and thought it would be a great refresher for YouTube as well. I'm starting out with 0.006 beading thread and a size 10 needle. I have 8s here to start, showing how the pattern goes, and then we'll go up from there. To start out, we are going to be doing a form of peyote stitch. We're not doing tubular. This is not going 3-dimensional. We're staying flat and making it 2-dimensional. So how are we doing this? We're going to start out by adding a series, we'll do 5, of our 8/0 seed beads. We're dropping this down to our base. And we're going to sew back through a couple of those beads. Let's go through 4 of them. When I sew back through, I'm sewing from the tail that I'm holding on to up towards the end, and that's turning it into a little bit of a circular design. See how those 5 beads are sitting in the center there? What we're going to do now is we're going to add our second row of our peyote stitch. So normally for flat peyote, we're going to start out with all 10 beads on at once. You can certainly do that, and sometimes I do like to teach that way, but we're going to make it a little bit simpler. So I'm holding that thread, not having tied it into a knot, and I'm going to pick up one new 8/0 seed bead, and I'm going to sew right into the next gold 8/0 seed bead. See how that green will just kind of sit right in the middle there? Pick up another one, sew through the next gold bead. Now I used 5 beads. You can use whatever count you want, and we'll go over that as I show you the varieties after we learn. Add one more bead, sew through your next gold bead. See how those are sitting right inside there? One more bead, sew through the next gold bead. Broken record, one more bead, sew through the next gold bead. Now, obviously, I could keep going around and around and around in a circle, adding one bead between each of my last rows. However, I'm going to get to a spot and a point where that becomes into that tubular section rather than circular. So how do I keep it flat and 2-dimensional? I'm going to start adding more than one bead on at a time. As you finish up a row, you add that last 5 times that you're sewing through, or 5 units. You're going to step up through the first bead that you just added in the previous row. So I'm stepping up through bead number 1 that I added in that second row. Now to fill in this gap in space, again, I could use 1 seed bead, but what that's going to do is create a tube. I don't want that. So to make up that space, I'm going to switch to my gold for my third row. I'm going to use 2 beads at a time, and then sew through my next green bead. Once again, kind of spinning it around in a circle. 2 beads go on. This is going to be my second grouping of beads, and I sew through the green. So because I originally started out with 5 beads, I'm starting out doing 5 groupings of beads. This time I'm using 2 beads at a time. Again, that's just working to fill in that hole. 2 beads go on. You can see I'm spinning around in my hand as I'm working with it, doing that circle. 2 beads go on, back through that green. Now here's where it's a little bit different. If you want to, and you want to keep with one size, and you want it to keep filling in, I'm going to show you how we're going to progress to our 4th row and add in more beads. So on the last 3 rows, first row we added 5 beads, second row we added 5 beads to our green, third row we added 5 groups of beads, 5 groups of 2. As we progress to the 4th row, I'm going to step up just through the first gold bead that I added in the 4th row. So each time I added a bead in row number 4, I added 2. This time what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through every single gold bead and add a green bead between it. What this is going to do is increase my count from doing 5 times rather that I sew through the previous row to 10 times. So I'm going to add a green, sew through the next gold. So those gold beads that I added 2 at a time, I'm now separating out and I'm adding a green bead between each one of those gold beads. So I'm separating out those 10 beads, and instead of 2 groups of 5 now, or I'm sorry, 5 groups of 2, I'm adding 1 individual bead between each one of my gold beads. And see how I'm still circling around? But the spacing is great. It's staying with that 2-dimensional shape. I'm not getting it to waver or to waffle or anything. And I'm going around the whole way, figuring out that spacing. The key to circular peyote is you can always take out the last row if it doesn't sit nicely. If your spacing gets off, it's just not cooperating the way that you want it to, you can go in and unsew the last row. Going in here, sewing this in, and then one more time here, I'm going to sew through that next bead. And then once again, step up through the first bead that was added in the row that I just ended. So once again, to refresh, I had 5 gold beads that I started with. Then I added 1 green bead between each of those 5 beads, sewing through those 5 times. The next row, I also did 5 units, but each unit had 2. In the next row here, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4. In the 4th unit, I went in and I put 1 8-0 seed bead between each of my gold beads, and you can see how that spacing is. Now to create the next row, I can do 1 bead at a time. I could do 2, but it's not going to fit in. Or you can have fun and pick up other sizes of beads. If I keep going around, again, I can do, okay, going back to the gold, I can do 1 gold between each one of my greens. And then on the next row, I'm going to need to go in and add 2 beads again. So I went from 2 beads to 1, and then 1, going the whole way around here, adding a gold. You'll notice some thread there. See that thread showing? Don't pull tight or you start to get it into that tubular shape. Just enjoy life. Have a little thread showing. You can grab some 15s to put on the sides of your gold if you want, if you have other beads. But just to learn the stitch, it's okay to continue with 1 size and have a little bit of that thread showing spacing issue. So I'm going in here, I'm adding 10 new beads between each one of my green beads and sewing right along, going back through that first green bead that my thread was coming out of. And as you exit, you'll notice that you have 10 more gold beads along that outer edge, fitting in really, really nicely. My next row, so I'm going to step up through the first bead of the row that I just completed. My next row around, if I add just 1 green bead, it's really going to show a ton of thread if I have it that it's laying out. So I'm looking at it and gauging, all right, I need to go back to 2 beads. 2 green beads go on, and see how I still keep with that circular form. The spacing looks great. My design is good. I'm going the whole way around. If I get the whole way around and I have kind of that wavy effect going on, take that off, go back to just 1 bead at a time, and wait for the need to add a second bead to the row. Once this is done, just like we did previously when we had the gold in groups of 2, we're going to separate out the green beads 1 by 1 and add a bead in between each. So it's that constant section of feeling like you need to add 1 bead or 2 bead and looking at what the spacing is from the last row of peyote stitch that your needle is coming out of. So here again, I'm getting bigger. And see, it fit really, really nicely. And once again, I'm stepping up through the first bead that I just added. Now, as I get bigger, I'm going to increase again, making coasters here, really. You're going in here and you're like, okay, how do I want to increase? do I want to add a gold bead between each one of my green beads? Just like we did previously with the gold, we added one green between each. It's going to bring it into a little bit of a point, but it's still going to work for my design. One thing to keep track of is anything that you're doing flat, as it gets wider and wider as you're progressing, keep in mind that the chance for it to go in and not sit flat increases in likelihood. So I'm going to keep going in, and increasing these around. You're going to start to notice a little bit of a peaking effect because they don't quite fit in there. So if I want to, I can change up the design. Notice here in this piece, I have my 2 beads, and then I did a group of seed beads. I changed it up. So how are we changing it up in the design element to keep going and create that same circular peyote stitch that we just did, but creating lots of different varieties that we can then chain link together if we want to with some jump rings? To create those different varieties, we can change up sizes. So I can go in here and I can start with 5 gold beads in the middle, just like I did previously. From here, with these 5 gold beads, I'm going to sew back through those 4 again. Sewing back through the 4, I'm going to once again start out the exact same way, taking 1 more 8 and sewing in and adding in row 2 of the peyote stitch. 1 green bead, 1 80, so I'm still using the same size, is going through and placing between each of my gold beads. So 1 green bead goes between each one of the gold beads again. So we're starting out the same. After this first row, I'm going to change it up. So what do I want to add? Do I want to add another 80 between my rows? Do I want to pick up and add a 15 or a delica? Do I want to add some 11s? So again, after I'm done that second row, I'm always stepping up through the first bead of the row I just completed. From here, I'm going to go in and I'll pick up some of my turquoise 11s here. And I love that these have like a nice mandala look. You're doing the same thing over and over again. And each pattern you can do completely different from the last and have variety and decide where you're going in and coming out of the bead. So here I'm going to say, all right, to fill this space, I'm going to need, 3 11s. So see how I'm kind of measuring that against it. Say, 3 11s, that's going to fit in great. So I pick up my 3 11s, I sew into the next green. Pick up 3 11s, sew into the next green. So if I was calling this circular peyote, I would call this freeform circular peyote. You're adding beads in different numbers, different sizes, and really anything can work. After you're done with that group of 3, you're going to step up. So now, do I want to step up between each of my groups of 3? Do I want to step up and come out of the middle of my peyote stitch? I can totally do that as well. So let's come out of that middle, just say to change it up. Coming out of the middle blue, and then let's go back and we'll add a nice bright green so that way you can see it. And we'll continue with this freeform circular peyote. So again, this is going to be really standard. You're using all the same size. You're kind of following a pattern. Now we're going to have some fun. So I'm going to say, I'll add that 1 green bead between this blue bead, coming out that peak there. From here, I'll add another green bead and go through my next little blue. Add another green bead, go through the next blue bead. So I'm just changing up the pattern and deciding how I want to group in and add my beads. This will create somewhat of a lacy look when you change sizes and change pattern. So here I'm going in, creating my own design for this freeform circular look. Going in then, I'll continue adding in my 11s the whole way around the design. And then my next row, I'll pick up those 11s and decide to add something between it. So as I go around the next time, I'll pick up these 11s and say, what do I have room for? Probably 1 more 11, and then I'll progress into an 8. Or then I'll go in and maybe I'll start on this one with delicas. So this one here, I started with a collection of 6 delicas, and then I added another row of delicas. And then between that, I added a row of 11s. After that, I added an 8 between each of the 11s. On this one here, I started out with 5 of my darker Montana blue 8/0s, added another row of Montana blue, and I did 3 delicas between each of those. After the 3 delicas, my next row was 1 8/0 seed bead. With this one here, I started out with 4 beads and did 4, and then did a delica, 8/0 delica to catch that and make kind of that quilted pattern. So it really is up to you how you want to keep going, designing and creating when you do this freeform circular peyote. So here I'm continuing to go around, adding in my seed beads and deciding what I want my next row to look like. And it's okay to start out like most freeform things and not know what the next row is going to look like. If you really love a design and you say, oh, that one was great, make another one. Make it into a set of earrings. Or then you can have that replicated pattern to go off of. But when it comes to this design and that freeform look, you're just changing up beads, changing up design elements, changing up counts, and continuing on with that same idea of peyote stitch. As I go in here and add my last 2 beads, then I get to determine and see what size bead kind of fits between the spaces. It's almost like working with Tetris or building blocks. What's going to fit in the space? What's going to look nice? And then once again, even when you're doing the free form here, you're going to go in and you're going to step up through the first bead that you just added. So now you can see I have that spacing in between each of my beads, and I think I'm going to add another row of 1 single 11/0 between each because I have about that much space. So I'm going to go back to my green or to my blue turquoise and just pick up 1 at a time and add each. Next time around, I'll go back to an 8/0 because I have a little bit more space in there, and I'll add an 8/0 as I continue with this free form circular peyote look. Once you have your circular peyote piece to a size of your liking, it's time to figure out what you're going to do with it. So are you going to create earrings? Are you going to create links? Are you going to keep going and make it huge? What I'm going to do is create links on this design. If you, only want to do 1 and make it an earring, you can totally do that, and then make a matching piece. Coming out of one of the last beads on the outer row of your stitch, I'm going to grab what's called a wire guard or a wire protector, wire guardian. You can also link directly to a soldered ring if you want to. I wouldn't link to a jump ring because the thread is pretty thin. Link to the wire guard and then the jump ring. You're going to go back down through the wire guard after going up through one side of the channel. Make sure that thread goes right into that wire guard. And then whatever side your thread is currently coming out of that last bead, you're going to go into the opposite side and back towards that starter side. Do that once and then do it one more time to reinforce. So I'm going back through the wire guard. Oop. Didn't want to pull it out of the piece so much. Back down through the other side, back through that starter bead and towards the interior. When I'm going towards the interior then, what I'm going to do is skirt back through my peyote stitch. So what did I do last? I did a blue bead, and then the row before that, I did a green bead. Just going back along the edge a little bit. And if I want to, I can circle back in towards the exterior, have that 1 wire guard on for a nice little set of earrings, and it's all finished. I'm going to get to the other side, approximately the other side. You'll have some where they just don't quite sit in the middle, and they'll sit a little bit off. That's totally fine too. Again, we're doing free form, but I'm going to go back along that outer edge then. If you want to do a wire guard on the other side, I'm just literally sewing back down to the other side of the piece. Sometimes, depending on what beads you used and what stitch, it's easier to go towards the interior and down. Sometimes it's easier to go to the exterior. So I'm just following my thread line. So I make sure that I don't have any extra thread showing. Going back through the design till I get to that base line. Directly across from the wire guard or a tiny bit off. doesn't quite sit exactly. And once you're down below it, you can see here, no one's going to tell. I'm just going to reverse the thread back through that last bead. That sits about opposite, not exactly, but I can't go exactly even. So that one will work for me. I'm going to go in then once again, take my next wire guard, go up through the wire guard on one side, down through the other, reinforce, and then take my thread towards the center of the design. In the center of the design, as long as your thread matches, you will not see the knot. If your thread does not match and you're afraid that you will see the knot, bring your thread somewhere to the middle of the design and keep sewing around, and then you can burn your thread ends off that way. If you need to also, you can either open up or close up that wire guard by pinching it, or opening it up if you have a wider base that it's coming out of. Once again, then I'm just going to sew towards my middle, because for my freeform, I have nice green thread and I have nice blue and green beads. Going to make sure that that wire guard sits nicely there. Going back through my design so I don't see a lot of extra thread. Finding that starting thread, which actually is still attached to my starting piece, which was just that traditional. And then I'm going to go in here and I'm going to tie off my thread ends. So don't be afraid when it comes to circular peyote to step away from the traditional, going all the same size of beads and figuring out how to put those in place, and switching it up to use different sizes, different groups of beads, and grouping and creating arching lines, like in the earrings where I have 5 beads at once, then 2 beads, then 5, and really changing up the design. It makes for such a fun, cool, nice element and a really nice visual effect when you link and loop them together. Nice bright colors. I can't wait to see your designs. You can post pictures in our Facebook group for beading and jewelry making. This is also a great way to use up some of your stash. So you have a lot of random beads, even some super duos you can throw in there, or some other 2-hole beads. I'm going to keep going, making a couple more, and then I'm going to just simply link them together with some jump rings to keep going in my design and create a nice long necklace. Thanks so much for joining me in this freeform circular peyote video. Remember, you can make them as big, as small, as detail-oriented, 8-O's, 6-O's, crystals, and really change up the design elements that you're using for the designs. I can't wait to see again those photos in the Facebook group for beading and jewelry making, so make sure to check that out. If you haven't already, please don't forget, hit that little subscribe button so you don't miss anything from us here at Potomac Beads. As always, I hope this video sparked your creativity, you learned something new, and I hope you stay tuned for the next inspirational video.